students. So it's just saying that if they had some participation in the program, they had a 67% probability of desiring university after the program relative to 38% if they did not participate. There's a similar effect for expected attainment here, which is again a 30 percentage point difference. And then there was also this similar effect for their motivation to go to college. So you can see that for the low GPA students, which is the blue line, the effect is between 0.27 and 0.32 standard deviations. There was some effect for average students and then no effect for the high GPA students.
Is that just because there's a ceiling effect for the high ones?
There could be, I think, yeah. That was, because yeah, they tend to enter the program with already high levels of this, of these outcomes. So for this, the housing was the province that was poor with lower, oh, go ahead.
What happens if, so this is like a really structured education system where all the tests kind of like determine what happens to you, and your desire doesn't determine what happens to you? I mean, necessarily. So what happens if you really want to go to college, but you're a low income, or you're a low achievement student, and you really boost your desire, but your grades don't follow quickly enough, and you don't make it? Is that horrible? I mean, like, does that like really screw you? Does it make you like really miserable in life and unhappy that you didn't get to go on? I mean, is that a potential problem?
Yeah, I think it depends on which people you're talking about. I think there is, because it is so hard, the university entrance exam is the hardest to pass. I think they only award places to like the top 20% of scorers. So I think it actually is common to, you know, like fail the exam or have to repeat it again. The hard part is that you have to wait a year, you know, to take it. So I don't think that's looked down upon. But I think sometimes if you're from this low-income rural community, it starts to become harder to justify when, you know, your parents need your help now, they need income, and so that's really what they're up against. Yeah, I mean, they do have, you know, like Ho Chi Minh City is known for being having a lot of rich students, and so their parents are, you know, hiring tutors and classes that teach the tests, and so, but these students have a very different experience. You know, their parents, some of them can't even read, so. But I think just culturally, there is what's valued is persistence and like continuing to work hard, and even if they have setbacks. And in our curriculum, there's all kinds of stories we have from Vietnamese students who started off very poor, but then went on to have scholarships or academic awards eventually. So it is possible, but you know, they may decide for themselves.
It's not the people who are intended to be treated, and then like don't cross the threshold.
Yeah.
Like, can it backfire for those people?
Yeah, I mean, actually for this province, we got effects on the motivation outcomes, but not on the efficacy outcomes. So it could be that something like that where it increased their desire, but they also still feel there's so many obstacles to actually achieving higher education.
Cool.
So that's what makes you want to think, is there a way to redesign the program to better address that?
Yeah, I was wondering to what extent you think the outcomes you're seeing happen because of the activities that the children do in the camps, and to what extent they happen because they're just interacting with people who have gone to college or who have gone to college in the US.
Yeah. That's something I'd like to be able to test systematically. I do know that like for all the students, or for even the college students, relationships are a key outcome. I think what's really interesting is to see how even the American athletes who don't speak Vietnamese develop these really close relationships with the kids, and they'll have, you know, specific stories or anecdotes that they tell me about that. And I think the same for the youth is like that's a key reason why. I mean, these are only the Americans they're going to encounter in their lives, and so it's a real draw for them to you know, have these relationships. I don't think that's the only reason why you see these effects. I think also the content for the, you know, the specific psychological strategies, because even though they're from a collectivist culture, they sometimes suffer from some of the same issues, like, you know, not thinking their ability can be increased, or you know, blaming themselves for failure rather than external cause, things like that.
The education attainment measure, that was the extent to which they want to go farther than their parents, right?
Yeah, so one way I measured it was in that way, yeah.
Oh.
So for housing, I didn't get the interaction with GPA, but I did get this interaction with past participation. So it was most effective for the first-time participants. And again, this could just be a ceiling effects issue, because the returning participants came in with very high levels of motivation and efficacy. So here, this outcome just essentially represents intrinsic value for education, like how much they enjoy learning in academics. And I thought this was interesting because normally in school they say they don't enjoy it, that it's very boring and dry and rote learning. But here we got a very large effect on that for the first time participants, between 0.5 and 0.7 standard deviations. And then you see similar effects for utility value and motivation to go to college.
Is that after they've gone back to middle school? Is it during the summer, reflecting on?
So this province was the one where we tested them like 12 weeks later. So this was
Okay.
when they're
and they're in the
school.
midst of middle school,
Yeah.
or they say they're enjoying it more.
Yeah. So just to summarize, as I expected, when you correct for noncompliance, the effects are greater than when you just are assigned to the treatment group. And the reason for that is the treatment group means are lower in the intent to treat because some kids do the control condition, and then the control group means maybe higher because some control group students do the treatment. And so that's why you ultimately want to understand the treatment on the treated effects. So we found a similar positive effect on desired attainment in both provinces. It was more effective for low GPA students in Da Nang, which was the wealthier province, and for first-time participants in Haozang. So those were all things that I had expected more or less. I guess I didn't at first understand, why there would be these different effects. But I think one possibility is that in Da Nang, it's a province which has high levels of education. The middle school students, as you saw, had high GPAs. So it could be that they don't have much room to improve on their motivation in FSC middle school, but when you look at higher education, there is a lot of room for improvement because no matter who you are in Vietnam, the odds of going to university are very low. Only 2% of the population have a university degree. And then Haozang, as I mentioned, we seem to be increasing their motivation, but not their efficacy, which could, this is a province that was ranked 61st of 63 in terms of income, so they have many more barriers that affect their ability to go to college. So they could feel like it's still not realistic for them. And so that's something to work on with the program design. And then it was also more effective for rising 9th grade students in Haozang, which I had not thought of beforehand. And not exactly sure why that might be. So just returning to the questions that motivated this, can interventions derived from social psychology work in developing countries and also when embedded in real-world programs? So I think there's some evidence for this, especially with desired educational attainment. That was an effect I obtained in 2 different provinces and then in 2 separate studies, so it seems to be somewhat consistent. And again, the poverty here is much greater than in the US. The kids are only making a few $100s a year. Also, I think the RCT showed that the program can generate positive effects in very different provinces using very different study designs. And then even within countries, effects are, can be powerful but conditional. They depend on the resource levels and the larger environment of the province. And then the subgroup effects I found are consistent with the US-based studies, which find that these interventions are often most effective for the most at-risk students. So then we're trying to get a theory of change. These were the outcomes that were supported by the RCT. And then for just looking at all the studies as a whole, the ones in pink are where I had evidence for multiple studies for those outcomes. So I think there's various ways to extend this. First is just smaller ways, improving the measures to reduce ceiling effects, like trying to reach more youth to make sure they're aware of the program, improving the intervention design and fidelity. Because that's one challenge is that in any given summer we'll have 10 of these 3-week camps, and so they may be implemented differently by different volunteers, different staff, et cetera. I'd also like to understand the longitudinal trajectory. So not just look at middle school outcomes, but also, is it leading to them going to high school and university to a larger extent? Isolating the importance of specific mechanisms, which I haven't done so far. And then hopefully expand the program and be able to compare how it works in different sites, locations, culture. I think especially if I can figure out what are the key mechanisms, that will be really important to inform, which can be preserved when you scale the program, which need to be eliminated, which can be adapted for different cultures. I'd also like to directly compare how interventions like this, can they achieve either similar or greater effects to the more traditional interventions of economics. And so it'd be great to have a study where there's 3 conditions, one separately and then one combined condition. And then lastly, to also analyze the effects on the college volunteers, which I've done qualitatively, but not in the same way as with the youth here. That's it.
I don't quite understand why the emphasis on attending university is so central. is there not a huge benefit to simply finishing high school in Vietnam?
Yes. I think it's this idea of, even if they fall short of that goal, they'll still
No,
be better off.
I
So it's-
understand, but
yeah.
your measures seem like they were more
Yeah,
directed to that, and that produces the problems that one of the questioners asked you.
Mhm.
And I just wonder about that strategy,
Mhm.
as opposed to saying, it's really important to finish secondary school.
Mhm.
I presume there are considerable economic benefits to finishing secondary school
Right.
versus not. I presume all the normal middle-class jobs are, but that's what it requires.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. And I could probably add more measures to assess high school in addition to middle school and university.
Well, you're gonna have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Presumably, you have longitudinal data.
Mhm.
So you show effects on middle school dropout, but not high school dropout.
Yeah.
And in the randomized study, no effects on middle school dropout?
I just did that in the course of a year,
Okay.
so I just wrote it quickly.
Yeah.
Also, what's hard is the high school data is much harder to obtain, because with middle school,
Mm.
we work closely with the principals to implement
Mhm.
the program, so they're more willing to give us the data.
Mm.
With high school, they're going to different locations, so it's much harder to obtain that. Because
Maybe-
there's all kinds of permissions.
Maybe there's some data on just the importance of finishing middle school in your culture,
Mhm.
even beyond high school.
Yes.
Maybe use that.
Mhm.
So maybe I just missed this, but what actually goes on in these camps? That is, and what is it that you think
Yeah.
does the work? There was a question earlier, is it because they've got a new cohort and it's a bunch of people who are all interested in sports and doing
Yeah.
things?
Let's see. So that's a key question. Is there are a lot of components? So what is the key one? I don't know. But
So these are all very abstract to me as opposed to, I mean, what is it that the kids are doing every
Yeah.
day?
let's see.
So what might a typical day be like?
Yeah.
So a typical day is it's 4 hours, and they do the class on life skills or social psychology. They have 2 classes in sports, 2 in academics, and then this
What
like.
does the class in sports mean here? So they're learning a sport that they didn't know, or they're?
Yeah, so there's 4 different ones: tennis, soccer, volleyball, and basketball. And then the American coaches are usually experts in those sports, and so they're teaching just basic skills in those sports. And they have 6 classes in all 4 by the end of the 3-week camp.
Okay, so that's 2 of them, and then so they start with, sorry, I missed
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
class in the morning. I mean,
Let me see.
so a typical day, again, here we go.
So in this curriculum, which is we first talk about what are some long-term goals they want to obtain, and what is their ideal career, how would that help them, how would that help their family. Sometimes the college students give stories that they've had of their own successes, and clearly a lot of the Vietnamese experience is directly relevant because a lot of them were from the same types of backgrounds, but they beat the odds and made it to college. But even some of the Americans will have stories that will be inspiring. Like some of our athletes have won the NCAA championship and they get to meet the president. And so we've had cases where students were so inspired by that they wanted to go to college because of that.
To Duke.
Well, no. And then I guess I also
All
try
you
to.
have to do is be 6'11".
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't.
So
I'm talking about Duke.
We all thought you were a basketball player, yes.
Tennis. And then I think there's ways to. I think there's ways to adapt interventions, that have been successful here with, belonging or growth mindset or affirmation or strengths. And so I think that's what I try to do as well. And then we, as I mentioned, we provide information about higher education, how to obtain it, stories about specific Vietnamese students who, used to be poor but then went on to obtain academic awards. So it shows that people like them can also go to higher education. So I think this is like the foundation of it, and then we add these additional components. Like we have these academic classes where we're teaching textbook lessons from the next school year. So they're getting the material in advance. So that's one advantage. And then we're teaching it in a more applied way than they normally encounter that material. So in school, all they're expected to do is like write notes from the teacher and then memorize it. Whereas here, they're engaged in games and applied learning, specific sports examples. That's what's great about math or physics. You can model a lot of the phenomena using sports